Let's get right to our panel. Karen Finney is a columnist for The Hill and an MSNBC political analyst. Jared Bernstein is the former economic advisor to the Vice President and an MSNBC contributor. And Dr. James Peterson is an associate professor at Lehigh University and a contributor to thegrio.com. Good afternoon to all of you. Jared, if I can start with you, can you help us understand these 501c4s? They're what allow corporations and billionaires to donate money with complete and utter secrecy because the tax code says groups like Karl Rove's Crossroads GPS are social welfare organizations. That's ridiculous, isn't it?
It is. I mean, this social welfare becomes political warfare awfully quickly, and there are just many examples. Interestingly, quite hard to come up with these examples because you're right, the disclosure is absolutely minimal. But what examples we have are phony political ads, for example, ginned up to character assassinate various people running for office. Now, I've actually worked for various nonprofit social welfare organizations, many of which are dedicated to
education,
disseminating information on education, on poverty, on the economy, and things like that.
And did any of those organizations ever spend $25 million hammering a candidate?
Never in my career in working in actual social welfare organizations has anything like that happened.
Karen, the Huffington Post is now reporting that Karl Rove was the featured speaker at a luncheon hosted by Tag Romney's private equity firm just outside Romney's recent donor retreat in Utah. Rove reportedly talked about super PAC strategy, but his spokesman says the event, and I'm quoting, was unconnected to the campaign. Again, we've had the 501c4s. Now, we have this situation involving Rove and Tag. I mean, do you believe any of this?
Of course, Martin. I'm sure it was pure coincidence, and they followed the letter of the law, of course. Look here, but here's the problem. The problem is they probably did follow the letter of the law, but that shows you how flimsy the laws are, because even if we go back to the conversation about the 501c4s, technically they can call themselves social, these social welfare organizations, but there's not a clear distinction or definition of what that actually is. So while we're trying to figure out what that is, they can still go ahead and spend money on their programs, on their campaigns. So point being, these laws are very complicated. They're very flimsy. And unfortunately, most Americans don't really understand the difference between a 501c3 and a 501c4 and who gets to do what. And all of the campaigns and the corporations figure out, okay, how do we skirt those laws or come right up to that line? Like, for example, having Mitt Romney as a featured guest at some of the PAC events, which technically is also legal.
Indeed. James, the Center for Responsive Politics says that during the 2010 cycle, social welfare organizations outspent super PACs by a 3-2 margin. But they're spending their money on vicious attack ads. I mean, how on earth is that social welfare?
It's not social welfare. I mean, we thought Citizens United was a terrible decision in that super PACs were kind of a loophole for the political process. But actually, these 501c4s, these so-called social welfare organizations, are a loophole within the loophole. So there's a way in which our political system is really going right down the tubes. We've got to get money out of politics. It is corrupting the entire system. And the bottom line here is that 501c4s, these so-called social welfare organizations, are shaping policy. They're shaping political decisions and political outcomes. And if we don't become more aware of it and we don't force disclosure in this system, then we're going to have a lot more problems going down. It's not just about this presidential election either or the next round of Congress. We're talking about the political future of the United States.
Indeed. Jared, I mean, it must be the case that if one of these social welfare organizations targets you with $25 million, this could well swing the Senate, for example, couldn't it?
No, absolutely, and that's what James said is really very, very important. Let me say three things very quickly. One, I think we'll all agree, liberal conservative, we have a dysfunctional politics right now. Two, we have more economic inequality than we've ever seen. And three, there are virtually no controls, as we're discussing, on money in politics. That is an extremely toxic brew. That is precisely the kind of combination that will not just lead to dysfunctional politics today, but could really undermine the future of our political system.
Go ahead, Karen.
Politically speaking, though, here's what I don't want us to forget, because we like to sit here and talk about these things, and they're very important. But if you are making minimum wage in Lima, Ohio, why does it matter to you? And it's our job to also connect that why it matters to you is that the folks in the House and the Senate behind me have spent their time trying to placate the likes of Grover Norquist with, by pursuing, for example, Keystone Pipeline and, these ridiculous, trying to evade having to actually do something real on taxes and real tax reform, instead of doing things that would help that person in Lima, Ohio, making minimum wage. So it's very important that we continue to connect politically for people how this really does impact their lives in a very important way.
To that point, James, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, a major GOP-affiliated 501c4, is fighting a bill that would force disclosure of donors because they worry that donors would be subject to, and I'm quoting, threats, harassment or reprisals. Do they seriously expect people to believe this?
It's absurd. What they want to be able to do is they want to be able to support certain political positions that are antithetical to their consumers and their constituents without their consumers or constituents finding out about it. Karen's absolutely right here. The way that we connect this to the everyday people is essentially these folk have a chokehold on the Congress already. They're very, very close to having a chokehold on certain presidential candidates. And so at the end of the day, if we don't force disclosure into these situations, we're not going to know who's controlling this country.
And Karen, to Dr. Peterson's point, people, of course, are corporations, and corporations are people, according to Mitt Romney.
Yes, apparently so. But look, that's the other thing. This perversion of what it is, what free speech really is. Again, if you're willing to fund an ad, you should be willing to put your name on it. If you're not, then you should ask yourself why you're not willing to put your name on it. It's kind of like dating. Everybody should play by the same set of rules.
Jared, is it not the case that this White House has sought to be transparent in relation to monies that have come in for political purposes?
I would say it has, and I would say for very good reason. They actually have transparency as a value consistently throughout their policy, whether it's the Recovery Act or political financing. This point about the politics, the problem with the combination that I articulated earlier, inequality campaign, is that you end up replicating all the problems in the current system. Essentially, all that money is buying a politics that prevents that minimum wage worker from getting a wage increase, that prevents that kid from having a classroom of a decent size, that prevents the infrastructure. So it really does ripple through the economy.
Indeed. Jared Bernstein. Sorry, Dr. Peterson?
Politics is supposed to be representative, right? But what the money in the system is doing is making it represent a very, very small percentage of the people in this country.
Maybe even the top 1%.
Maybe
Karen
the top
Finney,
1%.
Jared Bernstein and Dr. James Peterson, thank you all so much.